Welcome everyone to More to Explore, where we keep you up to date with everything happening here at explore.org. And what a time to be watching birds on Explore. There have been many hatches and many more eggs laid in the last couple weeks, and we'll get that full update with Egg Watch later. But today we're going to learn a lot about the smallest of them, the hummingbird. So right now we're looking at one of three cams focused on hummingbirds. This here is Joy's nest. You can see one of the two chicks in the nest, just a little head popping out. We have Beatrix, who's been hanging out all morning. And then not a nest cam, but we also do have our hummingbird feeder in Panama. So we'll stick on Joy for the moment. So let's get to our show. My name is Brian Bird. And joining me is Explore.org's resident naturalist, Mike Fitz. Mike, good afternoon.
Hey, Brian, and hello to everybody, no matter where you're watching from around the world. Happy to be here. If you're new to Explore.org, of course, welcome to our community and welcome back to all of our longtime viewers. We're the world's largest live nature cam network with about 200 live cameras all over the world. If you have comments, questions for us during the program today, drop those in the chats. We'll be looking for them as the broadcast heads along. But yeah, Brian, we have a really cool program today because we are going to focus on hummingbirds. And the Anna's hummingbird that we're looking at right now, the individual mom here is Joy. She's nicknamed Joy. And she is caring for chicks that have hatched on March 29 and 31, respectively. So they hatched last week. And the female hummingbirds, they raise their chicks alone. So Joy has a lot of work ahead of her. But the pace of change at this nest is so rapid. The chicks right now are already more than double, I think, their hatching weight. They grow extremely rapidly. We'll see the chicks grow and be ready to leave the nest about 2 weeks from now. So it's kind of like a short window for us to watch these birds grow and then eventually fledge. And we'll talk more about this nest in our Egg Watch segment. But yeah, we do want to learn more about hummingbirds in general because they are the world's smallest birds and they are powerhouses. They achieve feats of strength and agility that, proportional to their size, outclass anything humans can do. Their metabolism is so high that they frequently risk starvation, yet like a fighter jet, they fuel up while flying, and no other group of birds possesses their maneuverability. Hummingbirds are unique to the Americas and unique among vertebrate animals for their athleticism and lifestyle. Observing them can be a true joy as well, especially when we take the time to ensure our communities provide them with thriving habitat. So to help us learn more about the amazing hummingbird, I spoke with Sheri Williamson, who is a director and co-founder of the Southeastern Arizona Bird Observatory. We have webcams with them as well. Sheri is also the author of a Peterson Field guide to the Hummingbirds of North America, and she's working on a new field guide to hummingbirds. And here is our conversation. Sheri, so great to talk with you once again, and thanks for being here.
It's wonderful to be here with you, Mike. Thanks so much. Appreciate you having me on today.
And for most people in North America, hummingbird season lasts only a few months. So that's certainly the case for me in my corner of North America. But as I understand it, it really never ends for you. The Southeastern Arizona Bird Observatory is located in maybe the greatest hotspot for hummingbird diversity in the United States. Can you talk a little bit about why that might be?
Well, we like to say that it's like any kind of real estate: location, location, location. Southeastern Arizona is favorably situated at the intersection of two great mountain ranges, the Sierra Madre Occidental of Mexico, and of course the Rocky Mountains of the western U.S. and Canada. And we're also at the intersection of two great deserts: the Chihuahuan Desert from the east, that extends as far east as western Texas, and the Sonoran Desert, which extends down into Mexico as well. And of course, we're also adjacent to the Great Basin Desert north of us, northern Arizona and up into Utah and Nevada, and the Mojave Desert of California as well. So we have all of these different life zones coming together. And we also have such a diversity of elevations from areas, down near 1,000 feet above sea level, all the way up to mountains that go almost to 10,000 feet. So we have tremendous diversity of habitats We have high and low and wet and dry and all of these different bioregions meeting here. And that gives us a tremendous diversity of wildlife of all kinds, plant life, animal life of all kinds, our insect diversity, our mammal diversity, our reptile diversity, all of those things are great. But one of our big draws, one of the things that inspires people to visit Southeastern Arizona, and for some of us to live here as well, is the bird diversity, and particularly the hummingbird diversity.
And hummingbirds are fascinating for so many different reasons. And I have a lot of questions for you about maybe why that is. But they rank among Earth's most agile and skilled flyers. Even when they're compared to insects. Anybody watching a hummingbird, I don't think they cannot be fascinated by their maneuverability. They can hover, they can fly backwards, they can go side to side, all with apparent ease. They can change directions in fractions of a second. They're very fast too. I read about one wind tunnel experiment that found that Allen's hummingbirds can reach ground speeds of something like 33 miles per hour. And again, this is like, I forget, what an Allen's hummingbird weighs, but it's like a gram or something. It's very small. So what special anatomical adaptations give hummingbirds such superb speed and maneuverability?
Just being small is a big part of it. When you're a bigger animal, it's just hard to move that much mass to those kinds of speeds without a gravity assist, which that's where peregrine falcons get their famous stooping dive speed when they're going after prey, is they're using gravity assist. But hummingbirds, as you say, can get up over 30 miles an hour in just level flight, and for something that tiny, that's pretty remarkable. But you also think about a lot of the larger insects can also achieve very high flight speeds as well. So being small is very helpful, just from the physics of it, being able to propel that smaller body mass to higher speeds is much, much easier than fighting the inertia of a bigger body. So that helps them a lot, just being small. There are a lot of parallels to insects, including the fact that they're a unique mode of flight, that their wings are moving in a figure-8 fashion, more like the wings of a bumblebee or a dragonfly. That too gives them more lift per wing stroke than a peregrine falcon or a white pelican or a sandhill crane or a Wilson's warbler will get. They are moving their wings back and forth, but also flipping them over in mid-stroke, so that the back of the wing, and the wing is fairly flat, which helps to provide them with the ability to get lift off of both the backstroke and the forestroke. They get about 75% of their lift from the normal downstroke portion of the wing beat, which is where normal birds get 100% of their lift. And then about 25% of that lift comes from the backstroke. So they are really very efficient flyers, even though it's a really high energy flight. It's very energy intensive. They're very efficient flyers. And being able to move their wings like that is what allows them to hover in midair. That's why a dragonfly can hang still in midair, is because its wings are moving in a figure-8. Same with a bumblebee, hoverflies, all those little hovering insects. Their wings are also moving in figure-8. But with insects, they're getting about half of their lift from the backstroke and half from the downstroke. Whereas with hummingbirds, they split the difference between normal birds and the insects that they so closely resemble. They're the only birds that are more often confused with insects than they are with other birds.
Those are so I think some fascinating examples of how different groups of animals have stumbled upon basically the same solution to a similar problem. If you're going to hover, you got to figure out a way to do it, and you got to be efficient about it as well. And that's one of the things that is special about hummingbirds. They are really kind of famous for their athleticism, and they are also, any good athlete is really efficient with their energy, right? You train your muscles, you train your body to be efficient with the energy, but your body can also perform at very high levels as well. So with hummingbirds, regarding things like heart rate, breathing rate, wing beats, what are they experiencing while they're in flight?
Wow. Well, in level flight, just normal level flight, when their wings are basically going as fast as they can, and that's actually one of the things that's misunderstood about hummingbirds is that most birds, if they want to fly faster, they beat their wings faster. With hummingbirds, their wings are already going super fast. What they do instead of actually increasing the wing beat frequency is they increase the amplitude of the wing beat. So when they're just hovering in midair, their wings are kind of doing this. But when they're in that level flight, their wings are doing this. They're going over more space. They're covering more space in the same amount of time. So the same wing beat frequency, but with a much higher amplitude of the wing beat coverage. So when they're in that level flight, their heart rate is probably going up over 1,000 beats a minute when they're just really pushing it. Their breathing rate can go up to 800 breaths per minute, I think. Which, our heart and our lungs would just melt down if we tried to breathe, or our hearts tried to beat at the same frequency that hummingbirds do. But, part of that is all the way down to the molecular structure of a hummingbird. One interesting elevator conversation I had at the University of Arizona one time when we were dropping off some samples for genomic analysis to a guy that we met who was doing some comparative genomics. We happened to climb into the elevator with a guy whose specialty was proteins. And he asked what we were there for, and we said, we're delivering a hummingbird sample to the lab upstairs. And he said, oh, I don't know anything about hummingbirds, except I know that the largest protein known, the longest protein molecule known to man, is in the heart of a hummingbird. And those long proteins that create the long muscle fibers are part of the secret to a hummingbird's heart not just melting down into a little pile of hot jelly when their heart rate goes up to, 1,000 beats a minute or 1,200 beats a minute. The highest heart rate ever measured in a hummingbird is 1,260 beats a minute. And that's really hard to conceive of in terms of even a high human heart rate. We're under severe stress if our heart rate goes up, over, say, 110, 120 or so. Imagine if your heart was trying to beat 1,000 beats per minute. We cannot do what hummingbirds do. Vive la différence, as they say.
And all of that ability that needs to be supported by energy, right? And hummingbirds expend a lot of energy. We know that they love flowers, but there's they have a special ability to use sugars to support their energetic lifestyle. How are they really able to fuel their muscles?
That is absolutely correct. And that's one of the things that fascinates scientists who aren't ornithologists, who, beyond ornithology, with hummingbirds and their amazing abilities. One recent discovery about hummingbirds, relatively recent within the last 10 years, is that when they take the sucrose molecule that we think of as white table sugar, and they digest that, they break it into its two component sugars. One is glucose, which is the same blood sugar that powers our metabolism, powers the metabolism of every other creature on Earth as far as we know. Hummingbirds also use glucose, but the other half of that sucrose molecule is fructose, or fruit sugar. Normally, with all the rest of us, as far as we know, all the rest of us animals have to take that fruit sugar, send it to our liver, and then the liver converts it. And only then can we then use it to power our metabolism. Hummingbirds can use fructose exactly the same as they use fructose or glucose. So fructose and glucose, the two sugars that come out of the digestion of sucrose, their favorite sugar, the sugar that's most common in the flowers, the nectar of the flowers that they feed from and pollinate, is able to give them that 1-2 punch of energy rather than having half of the sugar content, the energy content, have to be processed through the liver before it can be used. So they really are little powerhouses. The folks who study insulin resistance and diabetes in humans are fascinated with the fact that hummingbirds have high enough blood sugar that it would kill us.
Oh, really?
And it should be doing damage to all of their organs, but it doesn't. And we don't really know, at this time, we don't really know for sure why. But if we can figure out the hummingbird's secrets to tolerating that high blood sugar, we may be able to help people who have insulin resistance and diabetes live healthier and longer lives. So hummingbirds are holding on to some of their secrets, but there are a lot of scientists out there who are studying them to try to solve problems related to our own human lives.
We also know that even for a hummingbird, a balanced diet is important. So, like on our nest cams, for instance, where we're currently watching Allen's hummingbirds, the males of this species, they don't help or incubate or raise chicks. It's really kind of like the females that are doing all of that work, and they perform a tremendous amount of work. You just discussed the importance of sugar to the survival of active hummingbirds, and nectar is so great for a quick burst of energy, and sugar just in general. I mean, I know that I have a sweet tooth, and I probably anybody in the world knows when you eat some sugar, your energy level spikes really quickly. But sugar really lacks the fortifying elements that are necessary to build bone and muscle. So what does a mother hummingbird feed her young so that they can grow quickly and well?
Well, the secret there is it relates to a colleague of ours. His nickname for hummingbirds was sugar-powered flycatchers. The hummingbirds are very fast and energetic, and that's powered by sugar, but that energetic lifestyle is devoted in large part to capturing insects and spiders and other little invertebrates to provide all of the other nutrition that they don't get from flower nectar. Flower nectar, the fundamental recipe for flower nectar, the nectar of hummingbird pollinated flowers specifically, is sugar and water, and the sugar that content is primarily sucrose, the same sugar that we like best, that tastes sweetest to us, also tastes sweetest to them. And because they have this other side of their behavior, because they can feed on insects and get all of their solid nutrition, all the vitamins and minerals and proteins, amino acids, all the trace nutrients that they need, they can get those from insects and spiders, little gnats and flies and aphids, and even some exotic things like earthworms have been found in traces in the droppings of hummingbirds.
And so much about hummingbirds seems to be an adaptation for quickness. Their metabolism, their heart rate, their breathing rate, everything that they are able to achieve. But they need to couple their physical adaptations with the brain power and neurological wiring to process environmental stimuli. So maybe my perceptions of that necessity are unfounded. So please correct me if I'm wrong. But I wonder if there's been any research done on their mental abilities to process environmental stimuli at such a rapid pace.
There has been starting with the basics. One of the ways that we can get a rough measure of the processing capacity of any animal, even extinct animals, is to look at the size of the brain, or as a proxy for that, the size of the brain case. So if we're looking at, say, the brain of T-Rex, we would look at that cavity inside the skull where the brain was when the animal was alive. With live animals, of course, they can actually look at the brain. They can take the brain out of a specimen and weigh it and compare it to the body size. And birds in general actually have rather large brains for their body size, but of course it varies a lot. An emu or an ostrich has a relatively small brain since it's such an enormous bird. Smaller birds, including songbirds, tend to have rather large brains in proportion to their body size. In the case of hummingbirds, our smaller species of hummingbirds, their brains are about between 2 and 3% of their body weight, which for humans, our brain is only about 0.5% of our body weight, 0.5% of our body weight. So we are not nearly the big brain creatures we like to think we are. And part of that is that we do have very large bodies. Hummingbirds have huge heads in proportion to their bodies compared to us. So they have a lot of room in there for their brains. And bird brains are now known to be a lot more complex than the early anatomists and neurophysiologists and all understood them to be. We were looking at our own brains and thinking of our own brains as the epitome of neural architecture, if you will. And so we underestimated birds' brain power because we didn't understand what we were looking at. Now that we understand better how birds' brains are organized and the density of neurons present in birds' brains, we know that bird brain is a complement. Birds are actually really smart, and hummingbirds are very smart. But hummingbirds, a recent study found that hummingbirds have a type of neuron that we don't have, and in fact, most birds don't even have. And it's a neuron that helps them to deal with moving in 3 dimensions. Most birds move forward, but they don't move backwards. Because hummingbirds can fly backwards and up and down and side to side, they have to have these specialized neurons in order to be able to perceive the presence of objects, either stationary or moving, behind them and all around them, 360 degrees and basically in an entire sphere around them. So they have neurons that are dedicated to detecting the presence of, say, another rival hummingbird coming at them from behind. If you've ever seen video of some poor hapless kid playing ball and they have their arms out and the ball just hits them right in the face because they were not aware of how close it was to them, you get an idea of how those neurons work in us humans. Now imagine that you have a neuron that tells you there's something coming at you from the back of your head. So they really do have adaptations that even other birds don't have, because their way of life is so specialized, their way of movement is so specialized, and they're living life so fast that they have to be able to react in a much shorter time frame to danger, whether that's from a predator, from a rival hummingbird. They have to be able to respond really, really fast. They have very, very special brains, again, even beyond what other birds have. They have the smallest amount of DNA in the cells of their bodies of any bird. It varies somewhat from hummingbird to hummingbird. Some hummingbirds have a little bit bigger genomes than others, but they really have gotten rid of a lot of just the junk DNA, the DNA that's not coding for anything. They don't really need it, but it allows their cells to be miniaturized. And that's one reason that hummingbirds can be as small as they are. I think there's only among the species that they looked at when they were looking at the weight of the DNA in the cell nuclei of a whole bunch of different animals, there was one tiny little fish in Southeast Asia, I think, that had even less DNA in its cell nuclei compared to hummingbirds. So they're just miniaturized all the way down to the molecular level, and that allows them to do things that would be unimaginable if they had genomes like ours and cells like ours and physiology like ours. We're terrible at processing sugar. Sugar wants to go to our liver and make us overweight and cause all kinds of health problems. Again, hummingbirds can use all of that as fuel, and they need that because the brain is a very hungry, energy-intensive organ. And they are using some of that sugar to power their muscles, but some of that sugar is powering those amazing little brains, those brains that can allow them to operate in the full 360-degree 3 dimensions that even other birds don't have to deal with.
Well, that's fascinating. I didn't realize that hummingbirds were so parsimonious, so to speak, on even like the cellular level. So
All the way
really,
down to
really,
their DNA.
yeah.
It really is just.
And one of the things that's also special about hummingbirds too is that because they're maybe so small, they can evade predators pretty easily. They're also, in a way, fairly approachable, like with a feeder, for instance, and you can kind of attract them to your home or your community. But there's tricks to the art of attracting hummingbirds to like your yard or your neighborhood. Feeders are really a great way to do it, but not all feeders are created equal. What would you say are like the best qualities to look for in a good feeder?
Oh boy, like this is something that in those bouts of insomnia, I spend a lot of, the wee hours of the morning thinking about, designing the perfect hummingbird feeder. Because anything that anything that's not a flower is not going to be a perfect hummingbird feeder. But there are a few things that you need to look for, because we have to think about not just what the birds are looking for, but what we need as the maintainers of those feeders. So what we have to do is find a feeder that is easy to clean and refill, because the surest way to lose your interest in feeding hummingbirds is to have a feeder that's hard to maintain. And my favorite feeders are the saucer styles that have a little, lid that pops off, and you can get to all the nooks and crannies, so it's easy to clean. There's no place for the crud and bacteria and molds and things to hide. Um, the saucer styles are a little less versatile than the bottle style feeders, because with a bottle style feeder, your liquid level keeps being refreshed. Every time the birds drink it down, a little bloop of sugar water comes up to refill that base. But there are also problems with bottle style feeders, in that they tend to be more likely to attract bees. Not only does the liquid level come up to the same place all the time, which may be within the reach of some bees, especially the long-tongued bees like bumblebees and carpenter bees, not as much honeybees. If honeybees are attracted to your feeder, that may be because the feeder has a leakage problem, or there's a wicking of the sugar water around little parts. But a lot of those bottle feeders also have yellow parts as well, which is an attractive color to bees. So you kind of want to avoid feeders that have yellow parts, whether they're saucer style or bottle style. But during the really, high intensity migration that we see in certain parts of the country, the West Coast, the Rocky Mountains, to some extent here in Southeastern Arizona, along the Gulf Coast as well, when you may have thousands, literally thousands of hummingbirds migrating through, refilling a little 6 or 8 ounce saucer several times a day isn't going to cut it. You need a bigger feeder. So that's when we break out our bottle feeders. But for most people, a little saucer feeder that holds anywhere from, 4 to 8 ounces of liquid is a good choice, because it's going to be easy to clean and refill. The fewer moving parts you've got, the better. A lot of these feeders have all of the entire top is molded together, so there's not any little bits and pieces that can get broken and fall off, or that the woodpeckers can pry out to get a drink, or the orioles. So saucer feeders are a really, really good choice.
Yeah, and I'll add too, you don't need to buy hummingbird nectar from a store, and you can make it. Basically, the recipe is just like a 4 parts water to 1 part sugar.
Yeah,
essentially
that's the basic recipe. We like that because, your thumb is your sugar and your fingers are your water, so it's easy to remember. But really, it doesn't have to be very precise, because in nature, the nectar of hummingbird pollinated flowers ranges from the equivalent of weaker than 1 to 10, 1 part sugar to 10 parts water, all the way to as strong as 1 to 1, and even a little stronger than that. So you don't have to be too precise with it, but a 1 part water to 4 parts, 1 part sugar to 4 parts water is a good middle of the road, one size fits most recipe. It gives the birds enough sugar to keep them coming back, while not being so rich in sugar that it maybe distracts them from pollinating the flowers nearby.
And feeders, they're a great way to attract and enjoy hummingbirds, but they're not the only way. There's a movement among people in North America, in Europe, that have essentially like say, hey, maybe we don't need lawns as much as we've as much as they're present on the landscape. Maybe there's ways that we can give back to nature. So how can someone maybe make their yard or a section of sidewalk or a patio or a balcony inviting for hummingbirds?
Well, it doesn't have to be an all-out effort of ripping out your entire lawn. The way a lot of people start is they have their traditional ornamentals, they have their lawn, they have their shade trees, and they get interested in hummingbirds, so they just kind of buy some flowers that have been recommended as good hummingbird flowers, and they tuck them in amongst their roses and chrysanthemums and petunias. And as the birds start coming in, they start getting more and more interested. So maybe they take another section of lawn and create a dedicated hummingbird garden there. And pretty soon, if they really, really fall deep into that rabbit hole, they may end up with their entire yard being plantings. But, if you're concerned about HOA regulations, or maybe you don't have a lot of space to garden, maybe you only have a small space, a few little containers with a few hummingbird appropriate flowers are great. The red salvias are particularly good. One of my favorites that I recommend to folks because it's so adaptable and is easily grown as an annual as well as surviving as a perennial in warmer climates is Salvia coccinea. Texas sage or scarlet sage is a couple of the even tropical sage, although it's not strictly tropical, are some of the names that it goes by in the horticulture trade. It produces beautiful bright scarlet flowers. You can also get them in white and pink and lavender now as well because there are a lot of cultivars. But the red ones, of course, are immediately attractive to hummingbirds. Hummingbirds recognize that color as potential for food. And it's easy to grow in just a little small pot that you can stick out on an apartment balcony or, the patio of a condo or even a window box. If that's what you've got, if that's the space you have to garden, they'll go in a window box. And those are ways to kind of get that entry level into gardening for hummingbirds and bring them into a more or less natural nectar source, not necessarily a native nectar source unless you live in Texas or parts of the Southeast where that plant is native, but it's a way to provide them with something beyond just the sugar water from a feeder and give them a reason to keep coming back.
Right, and we know that most groups of North American birds have declined in numbers since the 1970s. So, well, what about hummingbirds? What's the current conservation status of hummingbirds?
It's not good. The vast majority of our hummingbird species north of Mexico have declined substantially since 1970. Rufous hummingbird is the biggest one. Rufous hummingbirds have lost, oh God, I forget what the latest number is on the percentage of but they're fewer than half of the rufous hummingbirds on the planet now that there were in the 1970s. And about the only species that really seem to be holding their own well are ironically ruby-throated, which some of that probably has to do with a lot of land use changes in the eastern half of North America, their original native range, that, a lot of the agriculture has changed a lot. A lot of the really high intensity agriculture has moved more toward the Great Plains where there aren't so many hummingbirds. There are what were once barren subdivisions now have trees and shrubs and habitat because things have grown up. People have planted their home landscapes and they've grown up into places that hummingbirds can survive. And then Anna's hummingbird. Anna's hummingbird on the West Coast is really quite astonishing. They used to be a bird of the mild Mediterranean climates of the central and southern coastal areas of California. And they have expanded their breeding range north all the way to Alaska, southeastern Alaska, and south into Mexico, down into the cities of the Baja California Peninsula, and inland to some of the large cities in northern Mexico as well, where they're living in big parks where there are, big old shade trees and habitat that's not really native natural habitat, but it provides them with the kind of structure and resources that they need to survive. And because Anna's hummingbirds are not migratory in the same sense that ruby-throated and black-chinned and rufous and calliope and broad-tailed hummingbirds are, they are able to live year-round in some of these places. Anna's hummingbirds are nesting in British Columbia and southeastern Alaska in January and February and March, which seems crazy. But that's when their little brains, when their hardwired instincts tell them it's time to nest. And so they're nesting at the time of year when their brains tell them to nest, even though climatically it's not necessarily the best time to be building a nest and raising babies in southeastern Alaska or British Columbia. So they are amazingly adaptable birds, and they're one of those birds that it's hard to make any generalities about because some populations seem to be relatively sedentary. Some do move around. So, for example, in Alaska, they see Anna's hummingbirds mainly in December, January, February, March, and by May, June, they seem to disappear, replaced by the rufous hummingbirds that come up for the summer months. But those are really the two species that are seem to be holding their own very well, and even in the case of Anna's, increasing. The other exception is the sedentary subspecies of Allen's hummingbird, the ones that aren't migratory that live in Southern California. They're expanding their range southward into Baja California, again, mostly in the urban areas, places like Ensenada along the west coast of Baja California, and inland as well, into the LA basin. They did not used to nest in Orange County and San Diego County in Southern California. They were confined mainly to LA County and adjacent areas across from the Channel Islands, which is where that subspecies originated. At some point during the 1960s or 70s, some of those little sedentary Allen's hummingbirds from the Channel Islands hopped over to the mainland, decided they liked it, started nesting there, and since then they've been spreading mostly southward, because if they spread too far north, they meet with the migratory Allen's hummingbirds that are present from January, February through into August, September, and along the northern coast, central and northern coast of California. That's another example of very adaptable, surprisingly adaptable hummingbirds that have managed to make the best of what otherwise would be a bad situation. They're making the best of all of the irrigated gardens, all the exotic plants in Southern California, and are prospering on account of that. And part of that is that they have a lot of human friends. People love hummingbirds, and folks in Southern California are lucky to have, 3 species of hummingbirds year-round: Anna's, Allen's, and Costa's. And so they have lots of folks that are out there looking after them, that are gardening for hummingbirds, putting out feeders, and they're benefiting from all the changes that we have created in areas that otherwise might not have been hospitable to them, might have been too arid, might not have had the right vegetation structure, might not have, had enough water resources to generate the kind of insect populations they need to feed babies and molt and all the things that they need to do with that very important nutrition from the little arthropods.
And I'm sure that we could easily talk probably for like 3 more hours about about hummingbirds. With the couple minutes remaining, though, I just wanted to ask you 2 kind of quick questions.
Okay.
You wrote a field guide about hummingbirds previously, but I hear that you're working on a new field guide. When can we expect that?
I am, and I don't know when to expect it, because I'm still working on it. It's been quite a long process, but I'm thrilled to say that it's being produced by Princeton University Press, which does some really, really good field guides. They have published some really, really fine field guides, and I'm thrilled to be one of the authors in the Princeton University Press stable of field guide authors, and I'm excited that Princeton gives me the flexibility to reformat the guide and correct some of the things that I didn't really like about the Peterson guide. I'm still very proud of the Peterson guide, which came out in 2002, and it is much of what's in the Peterson guide is going to go more or less directly into the Princeton guide, in that some things just really haven't changed. Some of the things we know about hummingbirds we haven't advanced our knowledge about them in any significant way. But there's also an awful lot we have learned. And some of that is from citizen science projects like iNaturalist and eBird, Journey North. Some of that is from things like nest cams. I'm not sure anybody really knew how hummingbirds laid eggs until we had all these cameras pointed at hummingbird nests. And now we know that the little mom, when she's ready to lay that egg, she climbs up onto the edge of the nest and poops that little egg right down into the cup. So there's all these little details that we now know that are going to go into my new guide, which I don't really know, but I'm hoping maybe it'll be out early next year. We'll see.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. And final question for you is, there's a scientific way to describe hummingbirds, based on their taxonomy or anatomy, morphology, genetics, many of the things that we talked about, their ecological roles as well. But the birds are more than that. So what do hummingbirds mean to you?
Oh gosh. Um, people people often, ask say to me, "Oh, you must really love hummingbirds." But it's more than love for me. I find them endlessly fascinating and addictive. Uh, I call them the gateway drug to birding and conservation, because so many people come to appreciate nature through that lens of hummingbirds. I came from the opposite direction. I've always been interested in nature and birds in particular, but nature in general. And hummingbirds took a little while to win me over, but when they did, I just kind of fell headlong into hummingbirds. They really are such an enormous part of my life that I can't imagine living without them. They are they've been kind of almost my reason for being for about the last 30 years.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, and good luck with your new field guide. And
Thank you.
we should talk again about hummingbirds. There's a lot more that we can
Indeed.
cover.
It was lovely talking with you, Mike. Thanks so much for having me today.
I want to thank Sheri Williamson once again for her time. Sheri is a director and co-founder of the Southeastern Arizona Bird Observatory and the author of A Peterson Field Guide to Hummingbirds of North America. And we're all looking forward to her new field guide coming out maybe in the next few years. If you want to learn more about the observatory, go to SABO.org. And of course, if you want to watch hummingbirds like Beatrix right here, you can do that right now live. Go to explore.org/hummingbirds. On our YouTube chat, there was quite a discussion about hummingbirds and reactions to what Sheri was saying in response to my questions. There was at least one question that came in earlier, though, from Greyfax, who was wondering about hummingbirds and climate change. So Greyfax wrote, the ruby-throated hummingbird is the only species found east of the Mississippi. Do you think climate change will change that? And so historically, yeah, ruby-throated hummingbirds are really the only hummingbird that bred east of the Mississippi River. That could change in the future. I think at least that with the black-chinned hummingbirds, the National Audubon Society has done some modeling that predicts that black-chinned hummingbirds may begin to breed in larger numbers east of the Mississippi River. It seems like the other species, maybe not so much. I think, like we heard Sheri say, overall, hummingbirds are kind of going to be losers in respect, I should say, to climate change. Some of them maybe expand their range northward, but they also might experience a lot of populations that decline, because again, just because habitat might be available for them to breed in farther north in North America, that doesn't mean that their wintering habitat in like central North America, for instance, will be any less healthy due to climate change. So yeah, if we want to protect hummingbirds, we've got to think about what we can do at home for sure. But we also need to think about how we can work with people in other nations to ensure that their wintering habitats are protected. Because again, birds don't know our boundaries. They have absolutely no idea about our political boundaries. They just know what's good habitat and what's bad habitat. So let's work with other nations to get that done. One other comment, and there's lots of them that I noticed, but one that came in from Diane earlier in the program. Diane wrote, one time I was on scaffolding painting with a bright pink hat. I kept hearing something by me and finally realized it was a hummingbird. It was pretty loud and funny. Yeah, so you can, if you wear bright colored clothing, sometimes hummingbirds will come up and check you out. I've even had bumblebees do this too, and I don't mind, because bumblebees, they're pretty smart. They're not going to just waltz on up and sting you. They're just going to check you out. Brian, have you ever had an experience like this where you've been wearing like something bright and a hummingbird came up and checked you out?
Yeah, I don't know if I've had that experience, but excuse me, being in Southern California, I definitely have some hummingbird feeders in my backyard, and I just got a red salvia tree just a couple of months ago, so I was excited to hear that was definitely a good one. But when they're around, there's no missing them. They are loud.
Yeah, their wings are loud. That you can hear their chirps, and they habituate to people fairly quickly. So if you like, just are consistent in your behaviors, like near a feeder, for instance, or near a plant that hummingbirds are visiting, and you just are still and quiet, they will tolerate your presence quite well. And I've even heard stories of people wearing red shoelaces if they're going on a hike, like in the mountains of the Western U.S., just because a hummingbird might every once in a while come up and look at their feet and be like, "Is this something I need to feed off of?" And they're like, "Ah, no." But you get a good look at a hummingbird in those situations. Thanks to everybody for their comments and questions during the program today. We're fortunate to share the world with organisms as amazing as hummingbirds. Their unique abilities are, to me, a showcase of strength, athleticism, and adaptation.
For sure. And we should definitely invite Sheri to talk about hummingbirds again. And because two of the newest cams on Explorador, as we've seen, are hummingbird nest cams. And of course, we'll welcome them to the community. And let's check on those nests and all the others in our reoccurring segment of Egg Watch.
This is our April 6, 2026 edition of Egg Watch. It's the part of the show where we check on the bird nesting activity of our myriad cams on Explorador. And this update includes information on many new nests, as well as some important milestones for others. The events of our nest cams really give us great insight into the dedication of parent birds. And we're going to start, of course, with the hummingbirds that were recently added to our camera collection. These are in Santee, California. They're both looking at Anna's hummingbirds. Beatrix hatched her chicks on April 3 and April 4. So expected fledge there coming up towards the end of April, maybe April 23 or 25. I mean, this is a really short window to watch these birds grow. The chicks become almost adult size in like 3 weeks. So it's a really short window. It's amazing to see their changes day by day. You can almost see them ballooning by the hour because they grow so fast. And then with Joy, our Anna's hummingbird, her chicks hatched on March 29 and 31. So expected fledge there earlier than Beatrix, maybe April 18 or 20, give or take a day or so, maybe on either end of that, if I didn't do my math correctly, or if they just develop a little faster or a little slower. So yeah, fun to check out. I will be watching this frequently over the next few weeks. But we have a ton of other cams to get to, especially if you're looking for a diversity of wading birds. We're going to head from the West Coast to the East Coast of the U.S. in St. Augustine, Florida at the Alligator Farm Zoological Park. We're not watching a specific nest here, but we can see several species of wading birds nesting in the trees. In particular, you can watch for roseate spoonbills, great egrets, and I think this is great egret chicks in this nest right here. One of our camera operators has found this nest and has been looking at it periodically. So just a great job by them. Snowy egrets, cattle egrets, little blue herons, tricolored herons, wood storks are also available to watch on this camera. So this season is pretty prolonged nesting season for them. I think maybe going into May or June. So watch for that activity there. And we're not done with the wading birds yet, because farther north on the Delmarva Peninsula, so that's the Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia portion, that is land that is east of the Chesapeake Bay. We're looking at great blue herons there. We don't know how many eggs are in the nest that we can see because it's perched higher than the camera. But herons, they'll nest in rookeries where many breeders or breeding pairs make nests in a small area. We see the male and the female incubating the eggs. We just can't see into the nest itself. So we're kind of guessing that there's eggs there. It looks like the herons have been incubating fairly consistently. Maybe late April, we can start to see chicks in this nest. Incubation lasts about 27 days, but we're really going to have to watch the behavior of the parents closely to help us see whether there are chicks in that nest. And our partner there is the Chesapeake Conservancy. Sticking with the Chesapeake Conservancy, let's head to Peregrine Falcons right now, because one of our Peregrine Falcon nests is in partnership with the Chesapeake Conservancy. Bo and Barb in downtown Baltimore, Maryland. There was a different female that was nesting here that laid a single egg, and that's the egg that you can see on the left side of this footage. That female happened to disappear, and our camera audience is really convinced that there's a new female at this territory right now, still nicknamed Barb, but she has started a second clutch of eggs. Her first egg was laid on April 3rd. Her second egg was laid on April 5. So this is a time I think we're going to start to see them incubating consistently. Incubation lasts about 30 days in peregrine falcons, so maybe early May for that clutch. And then heading to the mid-continent of North America, Great Spirit Bluff in Minnesota, Elena Newman, they have 4 eggs there. The first egg laid on March 19, the fourth egg laid on March 26. So expected hatch maybe for that first egg around April 18 or so, maybe a little bit later, our partner there. And for the next camera I want to talk about is the Raptor Resource Project, because Castle Rock also has 4 eggs. So Faber and Elsa doing well there. First egg laid on March 29 and the fourth egg laid on April 5. Expected hatch there very late April and very early May. And now let's turn our attention to bald eagles, going to the Channel Islands first with our Fraser Point nest at Santa Cruz Island and/or in Cruz. We want to welcome their 3 chicks to the world. The first chick hatched on March 28. That chick is nicknamed Sasha. And the second chick was hatched on March 30. That chick is named Zuma. The third chick hatched kind of overnight on April 1 and 2. That chick is nicknamed Ryder. Looking at a mid-June fledge for those birds. And our partner there is the Institute for Wildlife Studies. In the mid-continent of North America, heading back there with the Raptor Resource Project, we have hatchery dad and hatchery mom number 2. They have 2 chicks in this nest, and those hatched March 27 and March 29. So DH4, the youngest chick in this nest, hatched on March 29, looking at a mid-June fledge for them. So congratulations to these 2 birds who have been working really hard to feed their chicks. And then some more unwelcome news at the Decorah North nest, because DNF, the female of this territory, she was incubating a single egg that was laid on March 7, and that egg probably belonged to her previous mate, but we haven't seen Mr. North, I think, since like February or something like that. So she is paired with a unknown male right now. No one seems to be quite sure whether she's going to start a second clutch with the unknown male, but keep watching there. Her egg got buried in under some grass in the nest, and she stopped incubating. So many answers still to find on the Decorah North nest. We're also watching in Decorah, Iowa, at the fish hatchery territory, where hatchery dad and hatchery mom number 2 are hanging out. We were also watching Canada geese in that area. But it's been a saga for the geese that we were watching, because raccoons have depredated the nest. And I think this is actually footage of one of the raccoons. You can just see it to the right of the male goose munching on one of their eggs. So over the last few weeks at that nest, at least that we were watching, all of the eggs have either disappeared in the hands of raccoons or fell between the large branches of the nest where the geese could not retrieve or incubate them, or at least one of them fell directly over the side of the nest. But other geese have been visiting nests in the vicinity recently. So we still may have the opportunity to watch geese incubate and hatch their chicks. And again, thanks to the Raptor Resource Project for partnering with us there. Sticking with the Raptor Resource Project, Philippine eagles, Bayani, still doing well, has moved to an outdoor enclosure coming up on 3.5 or 4 months old. This is a captive bred bird for a critically endangered species. And the best time to watch Bayani is maybe the overnight hours Eastern time, at least for me. So something like 0800 to 1800 hours in Philippine time. That's +8 UTC if you are curious. Or you can just check out the snapshots or use the rewind feature on the YouTube player on Explore.org to see what Bayani is doing. And then we're going to stick with the Southern Hemisphere for just a little bit. We're going to go to Patagonia Azul Provincial Park with rewilding Argentina there. This is probably the last time we're going to include our Southern Giant Petrel colony in our Egg Watch segment because the chicks are fledging and leaving rapidly, but there still very much could be birds visiting this area over the next several weeks. But they stay in where they were hatched for a long, long time. This species stays at their nest site for like 100 to 140 days for some birds after they hatch. So slow to develop, slow to leave, but a lot of success happening at this colony this year. So check those cams out. Those cams will continue to run. And then finally, last update for our Egg Watch segment is the African penguins at the Stony Point Nature Reserve in South Africa. This is also a critically endangered species. There's a grotto where where the parents are finding shelter and they are incubating their eggs. We don't know how many eggs are in there, at least I don't. There could be 2. Typically, that's about the average for this species for a clutch. And incubation seemed to be happening around March 5. Incubation lasts about 38 days. So I'm predicting a hatch window that begins next week, around April 13 or so. Watch this cam, prove me right or prove me wrong. I invite our audience to do that. And thanks to our partners there with the AfriCam cameras and BirdLife South Africa. More eggs are on the way, including ospreys. I think we're going to get some osprey eggs pretty soon to watch, as you can watch these cams and other nests every day on explore.org. It is your opportunity to watch the dedication and hard work of birds in their efforts to raise their young.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And as much as there are so many birds to watch, we do have some other live programming coming up, including our regular shows starting tomorrow, every Tuesday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. We have the AfriCam show if you feel like going on a virtual live safari. And then also with our partner AfriCam on Thursdays, they host the Wild Moment show to see all the best clips of the week from the AfriCam cams. And more bird programming on the way. April 8th at 2 p.m. we have another play-by-play with the Raptor Resource Project with Eagles and Falcons. And April 15, we have another play-by-play, but this time with the Institute for Wildlife Studies. So we'll get to hear a lot about the Fraser Point nest. And then, of course, on April 20, 9 a.m. will be our next More to Explore program. And Mike, as much as we love all of the streams on Explore.org, you're watching one other live cam.
I am, because today people are going to be at the moon, essentially. They're not landing on the moon, but this is where the day when Artemis 2, the mission gets with their closest point to the moon, and they're actually going to be the farthest. The crew is going to be the farthest any humans have ever been from the Earth. So the astronauts are scheduled to begin making observations of the moon, I think sometime around 2:45 p.m. Eastern time, and their observations will continue for the next 7 to 8 hours. I think during that time today, ground control is going to lose contact with the crew of the Intrepid, which is because they're going to swing around the far side of the moon when they're so it's going to block any signals to the crew and back and forth. But I think we're going to be treated to some amazing observations. And I've been watching what's called the Artemis 2 mission live stream from NASA. So I think if you type in NASA Artemis 2 mission live stream into a search engine, it probably would be the video that would pop up. There's many different options for you, but that one you can listen to ground control. You can listen to the astronauts talking to ground control. You get to look inside of the Intrepid module. So it's super neat. I've been kind of hooked on that over the last few days, and I'm especially going to be hooked on it later this afternoon. So while you have like our Hummingbird cams maybe in a pop-up window on one corner of your screen, put those astronauts up on the other corner of the screen. It's really an amazing engineering and scientific feat. And we congratulate everybody who has worked on that so far.
Definitely going to check it out. And thank you everybody for joining us today. That is our show. But of course, I want to give a special thank you to our moderators and camera operators, and of course, my co-host, Mike Fitz. And join us next time for another episode of More to Explore on April 20. And until then, happy exploring.